As always, this speaker series event is underwritten by Redknapp Associates, Dr. Dan Stewart-Regal and Dr. Fred Landro. We appreciate their steadfast support for this over the past 6 years. I'm also grateful to members of the Jacksonville Historical Society Board, of whom I think at least 2 are in attendance this evening. Board Chair Dave Octor and Board Member Bill Bishop, and Board Member David Jameson. Dr. David Jameson is also helping with the program presentation tonight, so you'll hear more from him in a moment. Dave Octor and Bill Bishop, would you please stand for just a moment so that people know who's partly accountable for this? Got any complaints about what we do? Take them to those boards. I'm also grateful to the members of the staff of the Historical Society, several of whom are present this evening, our volunteers, and our membership. And I hope those members include some of you this evening. How many are members of the Jacksonville Historical Society? Thank you very much. If you are, for some difficult to imagine reason, not yet a member of the Historical Society, we can remedy that condition this evening. There is information about membership available at the welcome table, and we would be honored to have you with us in the work we do. History matters, and Jacksonville history matters particularly. Our monthly speaker series are educational programs on topics that are significant to U.S. history or beyond, but always in a Jacksonville context. And this is a great city in which to teach a variety of things about American history. That's because it's a great storytelling platform for almost any aspect of history more broadly. This is a big, physically sprawling, complicated place. It's big in terms of its population, its diversity, its complexity, its natural history, its history of business and law and shipping and the military and transportation and construction and medicine and almost anything else that you want to talk about that runs through U.S. history. There's a Jacksonville thread to that story. That's one of the reasons why we are lucky to live in this place, and we're lucky to have an opportunity to learn more about aspects of its past. The more we know about the place where we live, whether it's our house, our block, our neighborhood, our city, our country, the more we become invested in that place psychically and spiritually and emotionally and financially, and that makes us better citizens of that place. And the better citizens we are, the more we are invested in its future. That's why I say that history is not just about looking over our shoulder at the past. It's about being sensitive to what that means for the future. It's about being aware that we're the stewards of the history that is unfolding for the generations that are coming after us. Well, tonight's program focuses on a topic that has long been suppressed, not just in the history of Jacksonville, but in U.S. history more generally. And it's a topic that is uncomfortable for many. That makes it all the more valuable and all the more important. The truth has to be present in any conversation about our past in order for us to imagine a different future, right? The truth must be present in any conversation that leads to reconciliation, and without reconciliation, we can't really have a future that is better or different. It's not the aim of truth-telling in history to make people uncomfortable. And given the rhetoric in the contemporary political discourse about matters such as studies of race and black history, given the politicization of those topics in education, and given the aversion of some to telling stories that make some uncomfortable, I think it's important for us to hold on to the fact that history is not about making anyone uncomfortable. It may be that at times, but it is not the job of history to blame anybody for what they did in the past. It's not history's job to praise anyone, either, particularly, right? It is history's job to understand what those people did in the past, to understand it in the context of the historical moment in which they lived, and then to measure the consequences from that as far as we can. That's enough, really, and it ought to be plenty. And it's hard enough work, I can tell you as a historian, just to do that much. So in considering the conversations that we are about to engage in this evening, let's be mindful of that. This is about truth-telling. It's about understanding how we got to our moment in the present and imagining a future that builds on and draws lessons from the past and that leaves a better Jacksonville for those in the future. Now, with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Jameson. I promised you to hear more from him. Dr. David Jameson is a member of the history faculty at Edward Waters University in Jacksonville. I'm honored to count him as a colleague in the discipline of history and also as a board member of the Jacksonville Historical Society. He's defined by a lot more of what he does as a community. He's a good Jacksonville citizen, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Jameson to
get it going. I'd like to see.
It likes you.
Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to introduce Lynn Sherman and Melanie Patz. Lynn Sherman is Director of Community Engagement for Social Responsibility for Baptist Health. Can you hear me?
Keep it up.
Where she leads community benefit initiatives designed to identify and address the unmet health needs in the community, set priorities and develop strategies to improve the health and quality of life for families where they live, work, and play. She has a master's in health administration and earned a community health leader certification from Health Leadership Institute at Morehouse School of Medicine. She has worked in healthcare at Baptist Health for her entire career. As a community advocate, she's nationally recognized as working with Tipping the Scale Mentoring Adolescent Advocacy Mentoring Program, touching the lives of more than 2,100 teens and receiving national recognition. She coordinates an annual Girls Empowerment Conference which serves more than 300 girls and serves as board chair for 904, a leader on the mayor's crime-based reduction committee, Population Health Consortium for Addressing Health Equity, and a board member for the Northside Community Involvement Incorporated, immediate past chair for the Guardian Ad Litem Foundation and the Friends of Dallas Graham Library. Melanie Patz is president and CEO of United Way of Northeast Florida. She has 27 years of nonprofit management experience, a bachelor's in business management from Sanford University, an MBA in economics from the University of North Florida. She served as vice president of community investment and impact at Baptist Health. And during her tenure, she spearheaded the implementation of a school health center at Vigo High School, brought the health care clinics caring for and underinsured Duval County residents together, resulting in the creation of Jack's Care Connect, and led the effort to initiate Blue Zones Jacksonville. Recently, Melanie worked with Baptist Social Responsibility Board and a team of 9 professionals to develop a strategic plan to significantly address health priorities, including infant mortality and mental health over the next 4 years. She recently she serves on the board of the System of Health of Care Initiative and Early Learning Coalition of Duval, and is a founding member of 904. She recently returned to United Way in September 22 as president and CEO. With United Way, she connects people, resources, and ideas to create a community of opportunity for all people in the areas of basic needs, financial well-being, and racial equity. About a year after I moved to Jacksonville, Lynn, Sherman, and Melanie Patz asked to have a meeting with me and came into my office and told me about this project that they were doing and changed my life, introduced me to a family of people, introduced me to a community of activists who have been working steadfast and hard, a certain core, and then other people coming and going. And they have been mentors and friends and colleagues and sisters in arms. Melanie Patz and Lynn Sherman.
It's the two microphones. It's what you get. Okay. So, oh my gosh, David, that was such a kind introduction. And I gotta tell you, you all know this, I'm sure you've heard David speak before. He is such an intellectual and such a kind spirit. He led a group of us in a book study with the CRT. What's it called?
Critical race theory.
Critical race theory. How can I forget the words? And you know what I learned is a lot of people who are talking about critical race theory have never read the book. I haven't even finished the book. It's pretty dense, I will say. It is not something that's being taught, I can guarantee you, in kindergartens or elementary schools. And I would also recommend, if you haven't read the book, then do. You know, that way you can be educated when someone says something. You can say, oh, well, I've read it, and here's what I thought of it. Okay, so 90 Forward and the Jacksonville Community Remembrance Project. So 90 Forward is an organization that started about 6 years ago. Is that right? Maybe 7 years ago? 7 years ago, by a bunch of volunteers who came together and said, you know what, we are, what had just happened is the city of Jacksonville had defunded racial conversations that they had been offering in the community. And so 2 people in our community who got together regularly, white women and black women, came together and said, gosh, do we really need funding to have conversations about race? And so they brought some people together who they knew, and over lunch, we created this organization called 90 Forward. And our mission is to create racial healing and equity through deep conversations, learning, trusting relationships, and collective action. And our goal is an end to racism in Jacksonville so that everyone can thrive. We are an official organization now. We received funding a few years ago. We actually have a professional staff of 5 people. 5 people. Lynn's the board chair. She has all that information. So, let's see if I can do this. So the Jacksonville Community Remembrance Project started before we actually had staff, paid staff, with the organization. So we had gotten connected, thank you, with the Equal Justice Initiative a few years ago because, and it just shows you 6 degrees of separation, small world. So there was a person who was a fellow at the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund who was working with Lynn and me, so I was with United Way at the time, Lynn with Baptist, on youth employment, summer youth employment. She finished her fellowship and started working at EJI, the Equal Justice Initiative. And we got connected, and she said, oh, Melanie, I'm going to tell you what I'm doing with EJI. And it was this project called the Community Remembrance Project. And 90 Forward had formed, we were a little fledgling organization, all volunteers. And I said, oh, I want to tell you about 90 Forward. So we had started the Race Cards Initiative. And so I was sharing with her about Race Cards. She was sharing with me about the Community Remembrance Project. And around that time, there was a lot of discussion about the Confederate statues and bringing down the Confederate statues. And so she came, her name is Kiara Boone, she's no longer with EJI. She came to Jacksonville and talked with 904 Ward's board, and then we met with some city officials. And the board said, absolutely, it is important for us to tell the story of racial terror in Jacksonville, because frankly, no one knew it. I've talked with a lot of historians, Lynn has spoken with a lot of historians, and they all thought Mississippi, check. Alabama, which is where I'm from, my hometown is Birmingham, Alabama, check. We know racial terror lynchings happened in those states. Jacksonville, Florida, don't think so. And the reality is, we have at least 8 victims of racial terror lynching in Jacksonville, and I say at least because you will hear more about research efforts to help us uncover others. And there are others, and EJI is pretty specific about the process that they use to identify victims of racial terror lynching. So that was back in 2018, and we started having conversations with leaders throughout the community and really started working on what does a Jacksonville Community Remembrance Project mean, and how can we do what Alan so beautifully talked about, which is share our full history so that we can come to a point of reconciliation. And our goal is that we do not repeat what has happened in the past, and instead we encourage people to act differently so that we create a new world of racial equity for everyone. So our goals, you can see, are listed on the screen. And this is a video that EJI developed that,
In 2010, we began thinking about creating a project that would go beyond our traditional work in the criminal justice area, deepening the conversation about race in this country, both inside and outside of the criminal justice system. We wanted to kind of get educated people about things related to racial history that we didn't think most people knew. And we wanted to just have a more informed conversation about where we are in this country when it comes to race and racial inequality. There is an historical context that's really key. To understanding these issues, you can't understand the plight of African Americans in America without first understanding slavery and the trauma and the degradation that slavery created. And you can't understand the next century without understanding African Americans were subjected to terror from the end of Reconstruction until World War II, lynching and convict leasing and the threats of daily racial violence. And then, of course, the segregation era, the Jim Crow era, where we talk a lot about the laws, but we don't talk about the daily humiliation that African Americans had to internalize, of constantly being marginalized, constantly being talked down, constantly being disrespected, and what that did to people and their psyche. And also what it did to majority people who were actually being taught that they were better than other people because of their skin color. It's a really abusive thing to do. And then finally, mass incarceration, where we've actually acculturated whole segments of our society into believing that incarceration is inevitable. All of that became something that we felt the need to address in a more detailed and nuanced way, understanding the legacy of that history. What does it mean to have enslaved people in this country for over 2 centuries? What does it mean to have traumatized African Americans for decades through legalized racial segregation and subordination? What does that era mean for us today? What does it represent? We wanted to seriously engage in truth and reconciliation. Countries that have suffered from decades and centuries of human rights abuses have not been able to move forward without committing themselves to a process of truth and reconciliation. In Rwanda, you've seen this. After the genocide, hundreds of thousands of people killed. You saw folks saying that we've got to talk about this in a way that was aimed at trying to get to reconciliation. In South Africa, at the end of apartheid, there was a recognition that that country could not move forward without an opportunity to give voice to what apartheid had done to them. And then people could talk about how do we move forward. And we didn't do that in this country. At the end of the civil rights struggle, we changed some laws, but we refused to talk about what had happened. And because we didn't talk about it, we created this dynamic in America. There's all this tension, all of this conflict, all of this division. The legacy continues to haunt us. We are still very racially polarized. And that polarization manifests itself in day-to-day life. It's very difficult to go any place in America where you have racial diversity without finding racial conflict. We're not going to move forward on issues like race until we tell the truth about our history. And we're not going to be able to reconcile ourselves to that history until we deal more honestly with what that history has done to all of us, not just people of color, to all of us.
With all of that, it's a very interesting clip to watch because it goes from the beginning to almost where we are now, which is pretty significant. With all of that, EJI has a special definition for how they define lynching in this as part of this project. And it was developed by a team of researchers. So lynching pretty much means, from EJI, an African-American victim who was killed between 1865 and 1950 in the United States by two or more white perpetrators acting illegally, extrajudiciously, and who committed the violence without impunity. No one was charged, no one was punished as a result of it. So many times, it was celebrated during these lynching ceremonies by people just coming together and having picnics and celebrating, and you really did well if you were able to leave there with a souvenir. And the souvenir was a finger, a toe, or an arm, or just a piece of that person to take home so that you could share with your neighbors. Americans, African Americans back then, they did the best that they could in terms of keeping a list of the people that they knew were lynched. That was not a very easy thing to do because some lynchings, as you may recall, were done without, no one knew. They were done in the backwoods, but when people knew about them, they kept lists, and that's the only way that they could keep up with it, especially during this period, because violence was just rampant during Reconstruction. So while the word lynching, as we think about it, we think that it means that someone was hung from a tree, as you saw in the picture, but contemporary researchers have looked and studied lynching over and over and over again, and so it really means a little bit more than that. They broadened that definition, and that definition is broadened to such things as shootings and beatings and drownings and stabbing. And community members who spoke of a lynching that they were aware of, they were terrorized by mobs. If they said anything, they talked about it or shared it with anyone. So African Americans back then, they kept things quiet. And we were taught to do that, and some of us continue being quiet and keeping a secret. And our great-grandparents told us, and told our parents, and our parents told us, you know, whatever happens in your house or whatever happens in your community, you don't talk about it with other people who are not like you and who do not look like you. And that came as a result of that period back then. So the Community Remembrance Project is one tool of the Equal Justice Initiative that offers it to people around, especially in southern states, who are looking to engage in social justice work. The Community Remembrance Project works in part, it's a much larger movement than what we see right here in Jacksonville. We're just one piece of that. And the goal is to create, create a place for restorative truth-telling and justice that changes the consciousness of our nation. The video, Brian Stevenson spoke of what happened in Rwanda and how they came together. In the video, he also spoke of South Africa and how they came together as a result of just talking about it and realizing that that was the past, and together we can create a different future. Similar to what happened in Germany also. We can name many countries where reconciliation was successful just because people chose to come together and not choose to just pretend that something didn't happen. Face it and move forward is what they did. So our work includes organizing soil collection ceremonies, erecting historical markers, and holding essay contests for local high school students to support the development of local community-led efforts to engage with and discuss past, present issues of racial justice. And someday, we'll have a replica of our monument that is installed right now at the National Memorial Peace and Justice Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. So first, we want to talk about a little bit about the soil collection ceremony and what that's like. So we do a soil collection ceremony in or near a space where a person in Duval County was lynched as a symbol of their suffering, where the blood, sweat, and tears saturated the soil. During the soil collection ceremonies, the community is invited to attend and be a part of that. Attendees are invited to, as you can see in the first picture, they're invited to scoop soil from the ground and place it in a jar. And we fill 2 jars. One jar stays here with us in Jacksonville, and the other jar is sent to Montgomery and placed with all the other thousands of people who were lynched across our country. The soil collection ceremony is followed by the erecting of a historical marker. Not that same day, but it's at a later date that tells the story. The marker tells the story of the lynching, and it humanizes the man or the woman or the child who was lynched. It places, and it's placed in the area the place that had been identified as the space where that person was lynched. An essay competition among high school students accompanies the marker erection portion of the community remembrance project. And someday we're hoping to get that monument that you see on the screen here in Jacksonville. There's no time frame in terms of when EJI will be prepared and ready to send a monument to us here in Jacksonville. But when it does come, or prior to it coming, we want the community to decide where it's going to be installed. We've gotten many opinions about where it should be. Should it be, on the courthouse lawn? Should it be in a museum? Should it be in the James Weldon Johnson Park? There's been a lot of suggestions, but we want it to be a community decision. We don't want to be the ones to make that decision, because the monument will belong to the community. It won't belong to us at 9 and forward. So Melanie mentioned earlier that 8 men were lynched. 8 men were lynched here in Duval County. And those are the only ones that we know of, because those are the ones that were recorded. We realized that there were many, many more that were lynched. We had a conversation some years ago when we first started this work with a group of people and spiritual leaders actually, and we said that there were 8 people lynched, and they begged to differ with us, and they wanted us to know that they knew that there were many, many more. But these are the ones that were recorded, and we're working on this project with EJI. And so we want to follow their definition, the definition that I shared with you earlier. But Melanie's going to tell you in a minute about our research team and the work that they have uncovered. Because actually, we originally EJI only uncovered 7, and what we learned in our research is that there were actually 8 people. They just mixed one of them up with the other, but they were 2 different lynchings that happened very close together. So EJI believes, and we agree, that historical markers memorializes victims of racial terror lynching can help transform our nation's landscape into a more honest reflection of the history of America and reflect the community's ongoing commitment to truth-telling and racial justice. Markers installed through community work and dialogue represents the accomplishment of the work done so far and stands as symbolic reminders of our community's continuing efforts to truthfully grapple with painful racial history, challenge injustice where it exists in our town, in our county, in our city, and in our own lives, and vow never, ever to repeat the terror and violence of the past. Never again. And so I want all of you to join me, if you don't mind, by saying, never again.
Never again.
One more time, never again.
Never again.
And it's up to us to decide whether or not it happens again. So we have to decide to be involved. So we want to share our most recent soil collection ceremony with you. These are just highlights from it, and it's only going to take a couple minutes, but we really want to share that with you, and perhaps when there is another soil collection ceremony, we hope you join us.
On Sunday, December 11th, 9 Forward, in partnership with the Equal Justice Initiative, hosted a soil collection ceremony for the late Edgar Phillips, a victim of racial terror lynching in Jacksonville, Florida.
The Jacksonville Community Remembrance Project is an initiative of 9 Forward. Our vision for 9 Forward is to see an end to racism so that everyone thrives. We go after this vision by creating safe, brave spaces for deep conversations and learning, building trusting relationships, and moving together towards collective action.
There is little known about Edgar Phillips, a native of Jacksonville who was murdered close to 100 years ago.
We know that when he left his home on Cedar Street in San Marco a few weeks before Christmas, 1923, promising his family to return before the Christmas holiday, he never did. When he didn't return home, Phillips's family began searching for him. Over a week later, on December 29th, his body was found decapitated in this creek that we stand here today, tied down with wire and railroad iron. He was just 26 years old.
Lynn Sherman, chairwoman of 9 Forward, has worked for years to shed light on terror lynchings that took place in Jacksonville.
This work is extremely important to me, primarily because it gives us as citizens of Duval County an opportunity to face the truth for the purpose of reconciliation, an opportunity for all of us to come together in the same space with the same, maybe different mindset to commemorate the man that was lynched in this space.
For students like Corey, today's event encourages him to get involved and learn more about his history.
It more so motivated me to feel or to learn about these experiences more and to advocate about them.
And for natives of Jacksonville like Pat Warren, hope is still on the horizon.
Being born and raised in the city of Jacksonville in 1951, I've seen a lot. I've seen changes, but I know that there's still more work to be done. Our truth has to be told.
And according to Bob Morris, the history of Edgar Phillips and beyond should not be singular focused.
This history is not only American history, this is my history. Not just the history of black people, it's the history of our people, American people.
Okay, so now I think we're opening it up to questions.
Actually, I have
I'm sorry, I'm confused. All right, so I mentioned earlier that we have some research that's continuing, and Lynn talked about how EJI had identified 7 victims of racial terror lynching in Jacksonville. Our researchers uncovered an 8th, which was really 2 incidents that were within a week of each other. And EJI originally, their historians thought it was 2 different descriptions of the same incident, but as they looked deeper, after our researchers encouraged them to, they discovered the differences between the 2 stories and realized that they were 2 separate stories. So in the video that you just saw, you saw 2 young women who were at the podium sharing the story of Edgar Phillips. They are Asia and Alex. So Asia Gilbert and Alex Rudnick. They are leading our research efforts. And we have at least 12 more incidents that have been uncovered by Asia and Alex, as well as other researchers and historians, that we think meet the EJI definition of racial terror lynching. We've also uncovered, I think it was like 40 plus other incidents of racial terror. Not all of those ended in death. They did involve a lot of terror that even continues today. So land being stolen from people, people being run off of their land, and in fact, there's a woman right now who has a farm who is being terrorized. She is a black woman, and the white people who live near her want her off the land, and so they have been destroying her property. And so this is continuing today, which is why we take every opportunity we can to talk about it, because it isn't just something that happened in our past, it's something that continues today. And unless we recognize what's happened in our past and we decide we're going to do better and different, it will continue to happen. So if you are interested in joining the research effort, the next meeting is going to be March 25th from 1 to 2:30 at the library downtown in the Special Collections Department. You can contact Asia or Alex in advance if you would like to, and that's not necessary. You can also just show up and they will welcome you and share with you some of the work that you can accomplish as we continue to do the research. Asia's email address is wrong. So it is AYSIA, it is her first name, and it is Gmail, not the mill. Gmail.com. Okay, now are we ready for questions? Okay, we're ready for questions. Open. Who has a question? Yes.
So have you done the soil collection ceremonies for all 8 known victims?
Yes, the last, the highlights that you saw was from the victim of the last one. So we have erected 1 marker so far, and it is in front of the Evergreen Cemetery on Main Street. There's a little plot of land, that's where the lynching occurred, and so we've erected 1 marker. We have a committee that's working on providing ceremonies or coordinating ceremonies for the other 6.
Yes.
Good evening. How do you go about, like, the land is owned by someone, right?
Right.
So, how does that work? They just
Yeah, it's a
grant you that
process.
permission or what happens?
Yeah, so the first one at Evergreen, that land was owned by the city of Jacksonville. And so it took us a little bit of time to get to the right folks so that we could get permission to erect the marker. The next one we think that will happen is owned by the state of Florida. So the property is, so we're in the process right now of going through that process with the state for approval. However, it is land that's, it's just a little sort of, I don't know, what do you call it?
It's a little triangle patch of land that's owned by the state, but it sits directly in front of a church. And so we are working with that congregation to get their buy-in, because we really want them to sort of own it in a way. Once it's there, we want their approval for where it's placed. We don't want to just place it in a space without getting their approval and their support for having it in that space, because we want it to be there for as long as it will stand. So, see, it'll come to me. I just passed by this morning, the new Church of the Redeemed, and it is actually on New Kings Road, and it's at Kings Road in Penton. So that's our next one, and we're moving forward after that. But most of them are either on city property, and I think that's the only one on state property, and then we also have some that are on private property. And then we've gotten some permission from those on private property to put it in the easement in front of the property, around the property. At least for one of them, we have that.
question and a comment. The comment is, I looked at your website, and because I was looking for where are the historical markers, so just a comment. For those of us who'd like to go and look at them, it would be a great, if you could have a map, so that we could take, be interested, particularly as you get more and more of them, to actually go and see and read the marker and get to know more details. The question is, and you referenced this, but I wasn't completely clear. Are you raising money to bring our, I'm going to call it a coffin? I mean, I've been to Montgomery, I've been and seen, unfortunately all the counties where the lynchings took place, and they've made 2 of each of those, one on display and the others out there waiting for the counties to bring them. Is that a goal, is to raise the money and figure out, and that's what you were talking about in terms of where we put it? Could you clarify?
So it does not cost us anything to claim our pillar. That is included in the EJI Community Remembrance Project total cost. What we are waiting on is EJI is going through a refinement process right now to determine how a community demonstrates its readiness to claim its pillar. And so once they have that identified, then we will start going through that process. And as Lynn said, there are many opinions about where that pillar should be located. And our intent is to have community conversations and ideally reach consensus on that location so that it would be owned by the community. At this point, EJI's only directive is it must be accessible by the public. That could be on private property, it could be on publicly owned property, it just has to be accessible by the public. So, more to come.
So, have you located family members of the victims? Have they participated in the soil collection? And I'd also like to know kind of how they feel about this.
Well, we have located one of the men who was lynched, one family member, and they were unaware. We were able, our historians were able to track them, to find them, to locate them, and it turns out that the great-granddaughter of Benjamin Hart is his name, and he was the one who was lynched in front of that church that we just mentioned. She took part in the ceremony. She spoke to the group, she and her husband, and they had the opportunity to scoop some of the soil and place it in the jar to really be a part of what was happening. And so how did she feel about it? She was surprised, she was saddened, but she was glad that we were doing this, we were commemorating him, and it really gave her a reason and an opportunity to do more research on her own. Yes, Jeff Patz.
I had a question as to how has your work been impacted by the current political climate here in the state of Florida and the nation of anti-woke, anti-CRT, anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion? How has your work been impacted by that? And how has the conversation or the method to getting to that conversation of reconciliation been impacted by this current climate that we have here?
So with this current climate, it has really given our community to learn, given the opportunity to learn more about 904, because there are many organizations who want to hear about it, and we've had a lot of opportunities for radio interviews. Kim Allen, who serves as the CEO of 904, and she does a magnificent job with sharing what 904 believes and what our goals are. We do realize too that it has sort of, and I'm not real good at saying this gracefully, but it has encouraged some funders for this work to shy away, especially if they receive money from the state. And so that is a challenge that we we see that being a barrier in the future maybe, but we're moving forward. We're moving forward with what we have. We are committed to speaking truth, and we're committed to reconciliation, and we'll continue to do this work. And so it has impacted us, but we continue to move forward. And we have decided that being silent is something that we don't want to do. We can't let the rhetoric that's happening be controlled by those politicians. We have to share the truth with people. We have to let people know what it really is. Like, so many people are so frightened of just the acronym CRT, and as Melanie said earlier, many people don't even know what that means. They don't know what it means, but it's been given a new meaning because that's what people have chosen to do. So we have to not be silent, and we have to speak the truth, and we have to educate people on what really is the truth, not just soundbite for politics. Emmanuel?
Yes. What year was that lynching that happened in front of the church?
You know, I started to pick up the dates. It was, but I know his. It was 1923.
1923.
Yes.
I was curious if you could discuss the sources that you're using to find out this type of information. Because I know, especially when it comes to lynchings and kind of violence towards African Americans, the source material is very scarce and very hard to come by.
Could you repeat the question, please?
What is the source material or the documentation to research? So Alex and Aisha have found a lot of great material in, frankly, the Florida Times Union Archives. And so that's why they're meeting at the public library, because that's an easy way to access that information. They have also been looking at some of the online tools that you can use to research your ancestry, like Ancestry.com, again, to try and piece people together and help us identify relatives. I mean, that's a really important question. We've been looking to try and identify relatives of victims as well as perpetrators, and are beginning to talk about what conversations with relatives of both might look like. Again, our purpose being reconciliation. Yes?
So I have a comment as a homeschooling parent and the parent of a daughter who went on the tour that you guys do. I really wanted to just share my insight on how things come full circle. And so it was not my plan to be sitting here tonight, but obviously it's definitely destined and where I needed to be. And so for us, I homeschooled from 6 years old to 16. It was my 16-year-old who went on the trip. It was very impactful for her, but the list of resources to prepare to go on the trip, we studied and went through them as a family, and so it's been very lasting. Even my performing artists, we found that it's people out there putting classical music and hip hop over the voiceover of Brian Stevenson. So sometimes we don't think that, this kind of material is reaching certain types of audiences, and it is. And I really wanted to share that. Sent us, we went to the yellow houses, we did the art, we saw all the soil collections that was on the table. We said a prayer or a libation. There was books, they all drew a picture. I mean, we spent a lot of time there and just really honored the memories that was represented at the altar. Or at least that's how we recognize it to be an altar. So really just more of a reflection is what I'm sharing in the work that you're describing here, because really what you presented isn't half of what we felt. And I didn't even go on the trip, she got to go. But really just the fact that she got to go and how she was able to go is just an indication of these ancestors telling us there's more work to do. And so I just wanted to share that.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and that's probably something that this group is wondering what trips. Thank you for bringing that up. No, that's really important. So 90 Forward has been sponsoring trips to Montgomery, Alabama, pilgrimage, so to speak. And we've been taking 25 to 35 people on a bus trip. Bus trip, 9 hours to Montgomery, Alabama, to visit both of the museums in Montgomery, and to have conversations, and to really have circle to talk about what you experienced while you were there. The conversations begin on the bus before you get there. The conversations continue at lunch, and they are scheduled throughout the trip, because we do realize that it can be a very emotional experience for people, and so it's really important that those who participate in these trips are able to share in what they are experiencing, what they're feeling as they go through this. These trips are free. There is no cost. The hotel is paid for. The bus trip is paid for. We welcome donations, but we don't even ask for those. But it is a free trip, because what is more important to us is that people across our community have an opportunity to experience this pilgrimage to Montgomery, Alabama, and really visit the Museum of Peace and Justice and the Museum of, the others too. The Legacy Museum, and it's wonderful. I went to the first one. They moved. The Legacy Museum has grown, and it is absolutely an amazing experience. And so I would encourage any of you to either sign up for the Montgomery trips with 90 Forward, so that you can go on the pilgrimage and experience all the richness of the conversations that are held. And we have taken groups of people. I think this weekend there's a group of teenagers that are going on the trip, and we've taken educators on the trip. We have taken just random group. We are specific about bringing sort of like people. We had artists to go on the trip together, because they can have a discussion in a way that they all connect and understand. So you are all, if you're interested in a Montgomery trip, please reach out to us. There's the email address, info@90forward.org. Send an email and say that you're interested in participating in the trip. Yes.
I thought I heard you mention something about an essay contest or something related to, I presume, young people. Could you elaborate more on your engagement with youth? And I'm especially thinking about this as an extracurricular endeavor. I see these little free libraries popping up with banned books. So I don't know if you're kind of running a parallel racial engagement that is now not really working so well in school systems?
So the Little Diverse Free Libraries is a kind of forward initiative as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first one was started today, it was unveiled today, and it was named in honor of Brian Rollins, who is a man who lived in Jacksonville for many years and did a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, along with his wife, Shirley Stetson, and Brian died last year of cancer. So, yes, youth engagement. The essay competition is part of the program that EJI established. As we erect an historical marker, and there is an essay competition for students of all ages, and they receive scholarships. They are selected to receive scholarships. And so we've done that once because we've done one historical marker, but as we do others, we will do more of those. The woman in the back was talking about her daughter went on a trip last year with students. We've got a trip coming up this year with students. Some of the students who went on that trip last year, I think it was over spring break, they came together this past summer and actually wrote a curriculum. Yeah, her daughter was in that group.
Yeah, she was a writer researcher. So the circle time that you guys talked about, that idea to the curriculum came out of the trip and their circle time, and then they did the internship over summer.
Yeah, so these students came together with some teachers, They were paid, and they wrote a curriculum about racism and racial terror. And it's in the process of being finalized, actually to be published, and to be sold to other educators around the country who are interested in teaching their students about this topic. Yeah, that's great. That was not an adult's idea. That was the students' idea. They, like you said, in circles, said we need to create a curriculum so that other young people our age have an opportunity to learn this.
And that was a result of the trip. That was a result of coming from the trip to Montgomery and really diving into what they learned, and they came back, and I can tell you that that curriculum is just phenomenal, and it's really shocking that it was done by a group of teenagers.
One more thing that I think is so great about that curriculum. So the young people who helped write it, as it is sold, they actually will receive royalties from
Just a quick question. Of the 8 that you've identified, were any of them women?
all men in Jacksonville. That is not the case around the country. In Jacksonville, that is the case, at least as far as we know today.
Just up the road in Gainesville, there were 32 people lynched, and Orange County was just there's just so many in those counties that were lynched. And these many surrounding counties are doing the Community Remembrance Project, and I'm just surprised at how many were lynched in other areas of Florida. It's just heartbreaking.
I just wondered if you have records of the perpetrators. I just keep thinking about all these people who are perpetrators who just walk free. And are there any records of them, or are you all doing anything in that?
Well, in some instances, most instances, that's not mentioned, but in some instances where people wanted to boast, because remember it was a sport, right? There were names that were mentioned, and when Melanie mentioned about land being taken away from people in our community and just take it because you're black, you don't need it, it's mine, I'm taking it, and we are just going to run your family off of this land. There are some records that our historians have been able to track and see who those people were. So in some of those instances, we just we have to be really careful about what we say.
I was just thinking about resources. You said Times Union as far as archives and library. What about church vaults? Like Bethel's been around since 1838, I think. So are there anything in like the archives of the churches?
Well, that is a good question, and those are people that we have certainly talked to. Pastor McKissick did an oral history with David, and he had a chance to answer some of those questions and talk about his experience with racism when he was growing up. But I don't know, and David may have to answer that as to whether or not we have checked with old congregations like Bethel to see whether or not they had some archived records. I know that there was a funeral home owner, a funeral home that was on Union Street, who said that there was a box of old records from the funeral home owner, and it was based very primarily African American folk, lots of historical information that he didn't know what to do with it. So we've been talking to him, trying to get that information covered. And I think that has to be our last question, but thank you all so much for being here.
Affording a space and being an audience for Lynn, Sherman, and Melanie Patz is both an honor and an opportunity for us to help advance the crucial work that they are doing. And being able to share these stories is our way of helping further advance that work. These are fraught times, it seems, if we focus exclusively on the news media and news reportage about the political rhetoric of the day, but really in the broad arc of history, I think we're lucky to live at a time when work such as this is going on. And when truths such as these can really emerge with more vigor into our political conversation. We've done a bit of our share of that here tonight. I hope that each of us will leave here tonight and share some of what we have discussed more broadly and help spread the gospel of these sometimes painful but nevertheless crucial and essential truths. It points the way toward a better Jacksonville. And as I said at the opening, that's a good part of the purpose of history. That's why there is a Jacksonville Historical Society. That's why the work of 904 and the JCRP is continuing. Thanks, Melanie and Lynn. Thanks to everyone for being present here this evening. I'm sure our speakers will linger for a few minutes if you have questions specifically for them. Peace and have a great evening. Thank you.